You mentioned in your book that perhaps the best example of the relevance of human capital is the rebuilding of Japan and Germany after the war, right?
Yes.
Your point being that there they were defeated countries with no capital, with no credit.
No physical capital.
No physical capital and no credit.
Yes.
And here they are.
That's right. Well, John Stuart, this is not a new thing, although we talk about the German miracle and Japanese miracle. John Stuart Mill in the middle of the 19th century pointed out that countries do often have almost miraculous recoveries from devastations of war. He argued that the physical capital is going to wear out anyway, and it's going to have to be replaced anyway. And what really matters is, do they have the human capital to replace the physical capital? Conversely, you may have all sorts of transfer programs in which vast amounts of physical capital change hands, either because of foreign aid programs or because of confiscations, nationalizations of foreign enterprises, and so forth. And yet, if the people who acquire this capital don't have the human capital to maintain it and reproduce it, it's only a matter of time before it begins to rust, to wear out, need spare parts, etc. And you've had a one-shot confiscation, but it really hasn't done anything in the long run.
Is there kind of a natural entropy that whittles away at human capital, or are you satisfied that it can be self-generating, as for instance seems to be in Switzerland, doesn't it?
Yes, there is a tendency of this human capital to sort of be like water seeking its own level. That is, in a country where there's a great deal of a certain kind of skill, that skill will not be as productive as in some other country where it's scarce. And so you, for example, find the British developing the steel industry and the railroads, and then they'll move to Germany to build steel industries and railroads in Germany, and even to man them in the early stage, because there were no qualified Germans, if you can use those kinds of terms these days. But then at some point, the Germans began to do this for themselves, and then they began to move into Latin America, and much of the industrialization of the southern part of Brazil is in fact by Germans, not by Portuguese. And much of the industrialization of Russia was by people who were not Russian. They were Germans, they were English, they were Jews, they were all sorts of other groups, almost anything other than Russian. Japan is another example where once they were exposed to the Western technology, they seized upon it and then sort of took the ball and ran with it themselves. There are other cases where the stuff comes in and it sits there, and the people around them don't seize upon it. And again, these are areas where I would like to know the answers, but at this point, I'm happy just to be able to ask the questions, because those questions have been ignored so much.
Which is why you question the kind of lazy formulation of foreign aid, right?
Oh, yes. That there you're simply transferring the wealth that has already been created, but you're not transferring the ability to create that wealth.
What about if you transfer expertise?
Oh, that's easier said than done as well. But I think that the expertise, if there is a fertile soil for it, of course that can happen. Too often in foreign aid, you're rewarding people for doing all the wrong things. That is, you're willing to lavish foreign aid on Tanzania because they have bungled so many things and people are on the edge of starvation. You are not willing to send foreign aid to the Ivory Coast because they've done things that worked out. And so you're subsidizing irresponsibility. But I've discovered the very same thing a decade ago in looking at programs for minority students in the United States. It's a certain mindset that you see in every area, that you want to give help to those who need it most. And often what that means is not someone who was more disadvantaged at the outset, but someone who was more irresponsible in dealing with the situation.
So that on the whole, if you're looking for productivity, you would tend to concentrate on those nations or those individuals who were closest to making it already,
yes,
and needed just that little marginal help.
Yes. But the other thing that happens too with foreign aid is that you subsidize counterproductive policies. It becomes easier then for people to oppress those minorities in their countries who have the entrepreneurship. And even in very poor countries, there are often groups who do have this entrepreneurship, either part of the majority of the society or particular groups like the Chinese, the East Indians in East Africa, the Igbos in Nigeria, the Lebanese in a number of countries. And what the political leaders can do is repress, and in some cases engage in mass expulsions of those people who have all the skills that are needed in the country. And then foreign aid will come in and rescue them from the consequences of having done that.
As in Uganda, for instance.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
So what would have been sensible there would presumably have been to have backed a government that would welcome back those Indians.
Oh, yes. The boat people are a classic example that most of the boat people were Chinese. And the reason they couldn't find a home was precisely because they were Chinese and were so hated. You see, I mentioned earlier that the skills tend to flow to where they're scarce. But what that means is that there'll be a greater differential between the majority of the people and those who have these scarce skills. And therefore, those people who are most needed will be most hated.
Most hated.
Yes.
Yeah.